This is Razer's new Blade Stealth, their 13-inch thin and light chassis that now is rocking an 11th gen Intel CPU, a GTX 1650 Ti Max-Q, and a stunning 1080p OLED touchscreen display. And below it, well, that's the behemoth of the Razer Core X, their external GPU enclosure that's meant for use with laptops just like this. But together, while they do make a very interesting pair, they cost, give or take, £2,500. And for a thin and light laptop and essentially an empty box, sounds like a lot of money. So, are they any good? Does it work well together? What's the laptop like on its own? All that sort of stuff. We're going to cover that in this video, so stick around. Of course, first, if you haven't already, consider subscribing for more videos like this one every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Now let's put the Core X to one side in our minds for now and focus on the laptop on its own, as let's face it, that's how it's going to be used most of the time. Now, like I said, Razer's Blade Stealth lineup is their 13-inch chassis, which is ultra thin, ultra light. Like, seriously, look how incredibly thin this is. It's absolutely insane. Now, this model, this generation, comes with two display options. Either this 1080p beautifully stunning OLED, which is also a touchscreen, or a 20Hz non-touchscreen, non-OLED as well. Both models come with the new 1165G7 Intel CPU, which is a quad-core with 8 threads, and in theory can boost up to 4.7 GHz. It also comes with a GTX 1650 Ti Max-Q, so the slightly lower power version of that, and 16 gigs of RAM and 512 gigs of SSD storage. All of that comes to, at least for this OLED model, £2,100, which is a lot. And actually, it's more money than even the MacBook Pro 13-inch, the top-end Intel one, which is weird to say. Now, I know the MacBook is a sort of different class. This has dedicated graphics, which is definitely unique for this size of chassis, but still, the fact that this costs more than a MacBook, well, it's kind of weird to say. So what do you get for your money? Well, a very well-built machine. Despite this being this thin and this light, the build quality feels fantastic. It has an air of quality around it when you use it, including, yes, Razer's usual wrist-slitting edges. Like, seriously, Razer, please learn what a bevel is. It literally hurts to use your products. Please, just a slight round would be way better. But anyway, when you do use it, it is a very nice and very premium experience. The OLED is fantastic. It's stunning to look at. Colors are incredibly vibrant. Blacks are, well, actually black. And, for watching content back, watching movies or watching YouTube or anything else, it's an incredibly immersive, enjoyable experience. The brightness is great, especially for a laptop of this size and, I guess, caliber. And yeah, it's a very nice experience to use. My only minor gripe would be that because this OLED is also a touchscreen, this has a gloss finish to the display, which means that reflections are really obvious. You will find it hard to not find an angle that won't have bad reflections. Like, even if I move the display ever so slightly, yeah, it's really bright, it's really obvious, and so that's something that, while I understand why it's there, it is also a bit of a distraction. Now, gaming on the 60Hz OLED is remarkably not too bad. Of course, if gaming is your main priority, then you should get this with a 120Hz display, or probably more accurately, get a more powerful machine, but it's still not too bad. Because it's an OLED, the response time is almost instant, and in terms of ghosting, well, there is exactly none of it. Seriously, take a look at the UFO test. Because it's an OLED, it refreshes all the pixels basically instantly, and so, yeah, it's great. The one downside, though, is that because it's 60Hz, it's pretty slow, and input lag is definitely not a strong suit. I was testing this both with the integrated GPU and the dedicated GPU and the Core X, and with the dedicated, the 1650 Ti, it was around about 75 milliseconds from you pressing your mouse to seeing a gun firing in game, which is really bad. For context, most other laptops would normally take 50 or 60 milliseconds, and a desktop would take more like 20 or 30. The actual playing experience though isn't too bad, especially if you're running on lower settings. The 1650 Ti does an okay job, but of course it's no gaming powerhouse, at least overall, and so you will want to game at those lower settings. For my benchmarks, I modified my usual tests to run at low settings, so let's take a look at those numbers and see how well it does. Now, starting off with Battlefield 5, like I said, I'm testing all of these games on low settings, and I've got to say, it's a pretty decent experience. 76 FPS average is certainly nothing to scoff at, and while the 1% low is a bit lower than I'd like to see, it's still plenty playable. COD Modern Warfare is a game that seems to perform very similarly to Battlefield 5, as we're seeing 74 FPS average, although a much better 1% low of just shy of 60. Otherwise, when it comes to Watch Dogs, this is a game that's just not well optimized at all. This is on low settings and we're getting 50 FPS average, which is actually really good for Watch Dogs Legion. There's also a 1% low of 38, which again is pretty decent for that game. But Fortnite though, this is a game that is very optimized for low settings. Now it is low but with a 100% render scale, and we're getting 178 FPS average here, which is insane and a great 1% low as well. On low settings you can expect over 60 FPS in pretty much any game other than, Watch Dogs and games like Microsoft Flight Simulator, but let's face it, that's kind of to be expected. The thing is that it does a pretty decent job, and remarkably, it manages to stay relatively quiet. I know you might be able to hear the fan now, but this is with gaming on it for about half an hour now, and it's only just ramped the fan up. It's a lot quieter than I expected. It's hardly silent, but like I said, it's better than I expected it to be, and so nice job there. The GPU is actually kept incredibly cool for something this thin, light, and relatively quiet. It sat around about 70 degrees Celsius in my testing while gaming on it, which is a pretty decent job. Sadly, the CPU doesn't fare as well. That was sitting at 95 degrees Celsius when doing any level of longer workloads, and significantly cut back boost clock, so much so that it was actually below its theoretical base clock, which isn't great. Now, this CPU is supposedly configurable up to 28 watts of TDP, which I know isn't the same as power draw, which is why I'm not surprised that I recorded this drawing 35 watts of package power, which is obviously more than the 28 that it says it's rated for. And even so, on a longer Blender render, the BMW render, which actually isn't all that long in the grand scheme of things, it was sitting at just 2.6 GHz all-core when doing that render. Shorter, bursty workloads tend to do a lot better at getting more performance out of the CPU, as it can boost up to higher, boost clocks, and stay there for just long enough that you can do those shorter workloads, and then it can throttle itself back down again. For those longer workloads, it's not fantastic. It's only a quad core with 8 threads, which does mean that basically any of the other newer chips, even the 9750H, which is actually a good bit older, is a good bit faster in multi-threaded work. Single-threaded does have a good advantage though. As you'll see in a second with the Cinebench single-threaded score, it's actually faster than even a 10750H in the Razer Blade 15 Advanced model, but in multi-threaded, it just can't really keep up. Let's take a look at those more CPU-bound benchmarks. Starting off with the single-thread results from Cinebench, like I said, it does beat out the 10875H in the Blade 15 Advanced and the 9750H that was in the Blade Studio I had, but doesn't quite beat the higher-end Intel and doesn't really touch the AMD parts, which is kind of weird to see. Sadly, in the multi-threaded score, you can see that it just doesn't hold up all that well. It can't beat out a 9750H by more than a couple points, and it doesn't hold a candle to both Team Red and the higher-end Intel parts. When it comes to Blender and the BMW render, you can see how the thermally constrained environment it's in means that it's the slowest chip that I've tested in a mobile CPU for a fair while. It's certainly usable, but it's not amazing. As for the user experience, that was okay. I think this is probably just a little bit too small for me. I can handle a 14-inch chassis, but I think 13 inches just a bit too small. My medium to large hands felt pretty crowded on the keyboard. And while the typing experience itself, the key travel feels good, the key feel feels good, like I said, the typing experience was a little awkward for me. As for the trackpad, that's still one of the best Windows trackpads on the market, and having a touchscreen available, especially on a laptop of this size, was actually really nice and very useful. The I/O is definitely sparing. You have 2 USB-A ports and 2 USB-C ports, and a headphone jack. Yes, that is more than you get on a MacBook Pro, but it's still not fantastic, and you will probably want to invest in a USB-C hub like this one if you plan on getting one of these. So that's the laptop, but what about the Core X? Well, that changes things. Because when you're playing games directly on the laptop, on the 1650 Ti, you generally have to play them at, I guess, medium to low settings to get a playable experience. But when you can stick any graphics card you like in this, connect it up with one cable to the laptop, and actually have it charge the laptop for you as well, well, that makes it a lot more of an interesting usage experience. Also, the fact that you can hook up external displays to the graphics card that's in here means that you can have a much more responsive and fluid experience with a, say, 140Hz display at home, and then you can, keep the OLED for the more color-sensitive work on the go. The box itself is pretty sparse. You have a slide-out tray that you can pull a handle and drag it all out, and on that tray is a 650-watt power supply, a 120mm fan, and the PCIe board with the Thunderbolt 3 connector on the back, and that's about it. The outer metal casing is just that, it's just a case. It's otherwise empty inside, save for some foam pads for some sound deadening and anti-rattle, and with this standard model, you have nothing on the back other than your power inputs and the Thunderbolt 3 USB-C ports and whatever I/O your graphics card has. If you're willing to pay an extra £120, you can get the black Chroma edition, which has some USB 3 ports, I think it's 4, and Gigabit Ethernet on the back as well, but that does cost more. Now, like I said, you can drop basically any GPU you want in here. It can in theory accommodate up to a triple slot card, although in my case, I dropped an Aorus Extreme RTX 2070 in here, and it's very, very close to the edge, and that's not quite a full triple slot card, so your mileage may vary. Either way, it has plenty of power for you to put basically anything you like in there. It has 2 8-pin power connectors or 2 6+2 pins, so you can put anything you want in. And like I said, I put a 2070 in, so let's see how that performs with the laptop. So for this round of testing, I cranked the settings back up to Ultra where they would normally be, and with Battlefield 5 we're seeing technically less FPS than with the integrated GPU, but of course this is on Ultra settings, and so it's 64 average and a fairly similar 35-36 FPS in the 1% lows. In COD we do get better, 78 FPS average with a 1% low of 62, which is a very playable experience, especially considering that the settings are much higher and the graphical fidelity is much better. Watch Dogs on Ultra is just absolutely insane, and so the FPS has dropped significantly to 35 and a 1% low of 16, but I'll be honest, that's pretty normal from my testing. Fortnite is still very playable on epic settings at 106 FPS and a 1% low of basically 74, although of course you can change your settings around, you can drop them down a bit, especially if you're using external monitor. There are still some teething issues with using something like the Core X, effectively external PCIe connectivity. Things like you need to restart the laptop for the graphics card that's in there to be activated or to become usable. Once you do, it is a pretty decent experience, and actually I tested the total system input lag both with the 1650 Ti and the Core X, and remarkably the Core X, despite being attached by a meter-long cable, did actually decrease the total system input lag to around 65 milliseconds, which is about 10 milliseconds quicker, mostly thanks to being able to render frames faster and so could get it up on screen quicker. But I honestly thought it would increase the input lag since it has to travel over, a 1 meter cable instead of, just right next to the CPU. Either way, when you disconnect the Core X, you will probably need to restart it, which if you happen to do that while game, Windows will handily restart for you. I mean, I'm just kidding, it will just blue screen because, you're using the graphics card that's in there and you suddenly detach a PCIe device. it doesn't always end up very well. But one other thing that I noticed was that when I did detach the Core X even properly rather than having it blue screen on me, I had to reinstall the NVIDIA driver almost every time I disconnected it because the system wouldn't detect the 1650 Ti as configured correctly, and so I had to reinstall the drivers, reboot, and then it would work. Now I'm probably missing something, there's probably some sort of process that you're meant to go through, but the fact that it's not obvious and so means that other idiots like me who have this setup will definitely be doing what I'm doing could be improved. And then there's the price. See, just for the Core X, this basic model, it's £260. And if you want the fancier Chroma one, which is definitely more useful as it has Ethernet and some USB ports, so you could, say, leave some peripherals and Ethernet plugged into it, and then when you get home, you plug your laptop in with one cable and you've got your gaming setup ready, well, that one's $380. And that's without a graphics card. If you want to drop in, say, a RTX 2060 Super, for example, you're looking at almost £800, and that's more than a lot of people spend on their entire systems. Add to that the £2,100 for the laptop, and the value proposition just doesn't really make much sense to me. I would really like to see some extra storage or a way to add storage to the Core X, even if it's in the fancier £380 Chroma version. I would still like to see that because the 512 gig of storage that's in this isn't nearly enough for a modern day game library, let alone a one system fits all type of desktop and laptop replacement type thing. Like, I only test a couple of games, but I had to make sure that I didn't install COD Modern Warfare's campaign or co-op so that I could install just the base suite of games that I used to test on. And like I said, I only test a couple, and so that would be a very nice thing to have. And for this much money, well, I'd really like to see that. For me, this laptop and the Core X don't really make all that much sense. I don't travel enough to really need a laptop full time, and when I do travel, I would rather have a slightly thicker, slightly heavier 15-inch laptop that fits me a bit better and would have more room inside for storage, for built-in horsepower and extra battery life, as this one, admittedly with higher screen brightness settings, was only getting about 3 hours to a full charge, which doesn't seem like all that much. For this much money, at least without a graphics card, you can buy the Blade 15 Advanced with the 300Hz display, which is also beautiful, and a more powerful 8-core CPU, and an RTX 2070 Max-Q instead. And that would be a much more seamless experience that would still get you the same build quality, overall user experience, admittedly being slightly bigger and slightly heavier, but like I said, being a lot more overall usable. You can legitimately take it anywhere, game on it with full performance, as long as you're plugged in, whereas with this one, you get an okay gaming performance on the go, and then when you plug it into the behemoth of a box that has to sit on your desk because the cable is so short, because it has to be, then you can get some good, good performance. But again, for way more money. Personally, I'd go and buy an Acer Triton 300 and kind of be done with it, but I appreciate that I'm not the target market for this, and so I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, especially if you are the sort of person who would want this sort of thin and light 13-inch chassis and maybe have something like the Core X at home. I would love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments down below, and just generally, if you're not in that target demographic, what are your thoughts on it too? Now, if you want to check out the Blade Stealth or the Core X, I'm going to leave links to them in the description down below. Those will likely be Amazon affiliate links that will take you to a local Amazon store where you can see pricing when and where you watch this, because it can and does vary. And I'll also leave a link to Razer's website if you want to buy from them directly or check out more information. There is also a whole load of other links in the description you can check out, from merch or hoodies or t-shirts like this one. There's Patreon if you want to get sponsor-free videos and access to our Money Men Discord chats, or a load of other stuff like VPN options, hosting, all that sort of stuff, so feel free to check it out. I will leave some more videos over on the end cards, including the Blade 15 Advanced video, so feel free to take a look at that. And otherwise, thanks for watching. If you've got any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. We'll see you all in the next video.